The smell of a hospital at 3 in the morning is unlike anything else on Earth. Not the clean, antiseptic scent they show in television dramas, the kind that suggests order and healing and the calm march of modern medicine. The real smell is heavier. It is the damp exhalation of human suffering pressed beneath fluorescent light. Stale coffee baked into industrial carpet. Iodine and dried blood that the janitors never quite reach in the corners behind the crash carts. The ghost of the last person who coded on this floor, clinging to the polyester curtains around Bay 7, even after the resuscitation team has gone home. Elena Vasquez knew this smell better than she knew her own apartment. She had spent the last 4 years breathing it on the overnight rotation at Hargrove Memorial, a mid-sized regional hospital in eastern Ohio. She arrived every shift at 22:45, punched her badge, changed into navy blue scrubs, and disappeared into the quiet machinery of the night ward. No fanfare, no greeting beyond a brief nod at handoff. Just the work. She was 43, with dark hair shot through with early silver pulled back with utilitarian efficiency. Her face carried the weathered calm people sometimes mistake for coldness, the stillness of someone who stopped being rattled long ago. She moved with a slight economy of motion, as though she had spent years calculating exactly how much energy each task required and never spent a calorie more. To the day staff, she was simply the quiet overnight nurse with the accent. Always left her paperwork immaculate. Never socialized at the nurse's station. Completely invisible. That was exactly how Elena Vasquez preferred it. What they did not know was that Elena had not always been this quiet. There was a version of her that existed in classified files inside Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a version that wore desert camouflage and carried both a trauma kit and a sidearm, a version whose call sign was stenciled in black paint on the inside wall of a forward operating base in a province of Syria that never appeared on any official map. A version who had, on 3 separate deployments, kept men breathing through the kind of wounds that have no business being survivable. She had been a combat surgical specialist, attached for 6 years to a classified element of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. She had worked alongside them, deployed with them, bled for them. She had been issued the same equipment, trained to the same standards, trusted with the same secrets. For all practical purposes, in the dark and the dust and the noise of whatever God-forsaken place they were operating in on any given night, she was one of them. She had left the army 4 years ago on a medical discharge after a vehicle rollover during exfil from an operation never officially acknowledged. The rollover fractured 2 vertebrae, bruised her spinal cord, and left a nerve ache down her left leg the VA called manageable and Elena called Tuesday. She collected her discharge papers, declined the formal ceremony, drove herself to a motel in Fayetteville, and lay on a bed with blackout curtains for 3 days deciding what to do next. She took a nursing certification exam she was already qualified for by virtue of her military training, found a job in a city where nobody would recognize her, and became invisible. 4 years later, she was still invisible. She intended to remain so. The meeting happened the following afternoon at 1400. Harrington's office was everything she expected. Diplomas from places that wanted you to know they were prestigious. A desk positioned for maximum territorial advantage. He made her wait 4 minutes before looking up. A textbook power gesture, as elementary as it was transparent. Ms. Vasquez, he said, using the civilian honorific rather than the professional title she was entitled to, deliberate, and she noted it. You violated the new nursing protocol, initiated an independent intervention in a post-arrest patient openly in front of a resident after I specifically countermanded you. He leaned back with the expression of someone who enjoys this part. It tells me you're the kind of nurse who becomes dangerous over time. The kind who confuses practical experience with medical training. I've seen this pattern before. Eventually they miss something. Their confidence outpaces their knowledge. Someone dies. He paused to let the words arrange themselves for maximum effect. You have a military nursing background. I don't know what that looks like operationally. presumably low-resource environments where improvisation was necessary. But this is not a combat zone. This is a credentialed civilian hospital with evidence-based protocols and a physician chain of command, and you will operate within that chain. Clearly understood? Elena thought about Gerald Polk, currently on the step-down unit with an intact heart and a blood pressure maintaining without vasopressors. Clearly, she said. Good. Consider this a formal verbal warning. The next incident results in a written reprimand and referral to the state nursing board. He glanced at his monitor. The gesture of dismissal. You can go. Elena walked to the door. Ms. Vasquez. She looked back. I understand that military service gives people a certain inflated sense of their own capabilities, Harrington said, still looking at his screen. That sense doesn't always translate well to an institutional environment. You might consider whether this role is a good fit for you. Elena looked at him for one quiet moment, then closed the door behind her. The months that followed settled into a cold armistice. Elena did her job. She documented everything. She operated at the precise perimeter of the new protocols, close enough to deliver adequate care, far enough from the line that Harrington could find no formal ground to stand on. It was a discipline she was very good at, operating within constraints designed by people who had never been in the field. She kept a personal copy of all documentation on a USB drive in her locker, updated at the end of every shift. She was not planning anything. She was simply prepared, trained by people who believed that if you were operating in an environment where things might go wrong, you ensured you had the record that would matter afterward. The crisis arrived the way crises always do, from the direction nobody was watching. It was a Thursday night in late November, 2 inches of freezing rain outside and the ER running at 120% capacity when the ambulance bay received the first call. A construction site collapsed 12 miles east of the hospital. 3 stories of scaffolding had failed in the ice, and 4 workers had gone down with it. The site foreman, attempting to help before the paramedics arrived, had moved 2 of them, and moving them had been catastrophically wrong. By the time the first rig arrived, Elena was already in the trauma bay, having heard the radio traffic at the charge desk. She had assessed supply status without being asked, noted that the O negative in the crash cart had not been replenished from the previous evening's abdominal case, and pulled 4 units from the blood bank refrigerator before the first stretcher came through the door. This took her 3 minutes. She was back at the bay when the paramedics arrived. The first patient was a man named Dmitri, 48 years old. His right femur had been shattered by a falling beam. The leg had an S-curve visible through his jeans that doesn't happen with ordinary fractures. His blood pressure was 88/50 on arrival and moving in the wrong direction. He was conscious and alternating between methodical cursing and a gray, sweating silence that was more alarming than the cursing. Elena was managing Dmitri's femoral bleed with a tourniquet and had already established 2 large-bore peripheral IVs by the time the overnight attending, Dr. Reed Calloway, arrived in the bay. Femoral is controlled, Elena said. Tourniquet is at the groin, high and tight. 2 large-bore peripherals running O-neg at wide open. His pressure is coming up, 94/58. He needs the OR, but he can wait 15 minutes. Good, Calloway said, moving toward the second patient. I'll need. The door opened. Harrington's white coat was crisp even at 11 p.m. on a freezing Thursday, which told Elena he had come in specifically. Someone had called him. She didn't know who. He took in the scene. He took in Elena at Dmitri's bedside, the blood running wide open. The tourniquet she had applied without a physician order because the patient had been in a non-survivable bleed pattern until 30 seconds ago. His expression arranged itself into something that was not quite fury and not quite satisfaction. The look of a man who has been waiting for an opportunity and has found it arriving exactly as he expected. Dr. Bull, Calloway, he said, his voice carrying the calibrated resonance of a man who always knows exactly how loud to speak. Who placed this tourniquet? Calloway looked up from the second patient, startled by the tone. I just arrived, Dr. Harrington. Nurse Vasquez initiated a major vascular intervention without physician authorization, Harrington said. He was looking at Elena now. Again. The patient's femoral artery was compromised, Elena said. His blood pressure on arrival was 88/50 and falling. I had 6 minutes at most before non-survivable hemorrhage shock. The attending wasn't present. The protocol requires physician authorization for tourniquet placement above the knee. You know this. You have been formally warned. The protocol also requires a patient not to die while we wait for the paperwork, Elena said. She said it without heat. It was a statement of fact offered in the same register she would use to read a blood pressure number, but it landed in the room the way only certain true things land, with a quiet detonation that doesn't need volume to be felt. Harrington walked to the center of the bay. He checked the monitor, 101/64, still climbing. He looked at the tourniquet, correctly placed, correctly timed. He looked at the IVs Elena had established. He looked at the blood product selection. He could not find clinical fault with what she had done. He knew this. She could see him knowing it. "Step away from the patient," he said very quietly. Elena did not move. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, her name like the name of an administrative problem. "Step away from the patient. If you want to manage Mr. Dmitri, manage him," Elena said. "Tell me what you need and I'll support the care. But if you're removing me from this bay to make a point about protocol, be clear about which one you're doing, because one is a clinical decision and the other is an administrative action, and they have different consequences for this patient." The room was very quiet except for Dmitri's labored breathing and the continuous beep of his heart rate monitor. Harrington's jaw was tight. The muscle in his cheek moved. "Get out of this bay," he said. Low, controlled, devastating. "I will be calling the nursing board in the morning. I am recommending immediate license review and suspension pending investigation. You are done here, Ms. Vasquez. I want your badge on the desk before you leave the building tonight." Elena looked at him. She looked at Dmitri, whose blood pressure now read 108/70 and was stabilizing on the fluids she had run wide open. She looked at the tourniquet she had applied, correctly seated, correctly tightened, the time written on the label in black marker. She walked out of the bay. She sat in the small family consultation room at the end of the east corridor, the one with the box of tissues and the framed print that said strength in the hardest moments in cursive that was always grimly ironic, given what the room was actually used for. She stared at it now. She was not afraid. She had not been afraid in the bay, and she was not afraid now, which was its own piece of data she had grown accustomed to analyzing. She had used up her quota of fear in places where fear was a survival liability, and what replaced it was a hard, functional clarity. She thought about the nursing board. She thought about the license review. She thought about Gerald Polk's heart settling into a normal rhythm when the warm saline ran. She thought about Dmitri's blood pressure climbing. She sat with these things for 11 minutes, then got up to go to the locker room and get her bag. She was halfway down the corridor when the hospital shook. Not an earthquake. The floor didn't move. It was a concussive displacement of air she felt in her chest before she heard it. The kind of deep bass note that doesn't come from building systems or anything that belongs in a civilian environment. Her body knew what it was before her conscious mind confirmed it. Rotors, multiple. Heavy. Very close. She walked quickly to the eastern window. Through the rain-blurred glass, she could see the sodium vapor lights of the parking area, and in that orange light, descending with a controlled aggression that was nothing like a civilian medevac, she made out the silhouette of military helicopters, not UH-60 Blackhawks. The profile was different. Heavier. MH-6 Little Birds flanking something bigger, an MH-60M, the variant used by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The 160th didn't fly general transport. They flew operators. Elena pressed her hand flat against the cold glass. Her pulse had not elevated. That was the data point she registered. Something was coming through the door that did not belong in this building, and whoever was flying those birds had come here on purpose. The desk clerk, a 22-year-old named Priya, who had never seen anything more alarming than a combative patient in the waiting area, looked at the hallway and didn't immediately understand what she was seeing. Coming through the corridor at a pace that was not quite running but emphatically not walking were 6 men who did not belong here. Dark tactical pants, mid-layer fleeces, boots that were heavy and broken in. 3 of them moved with the shoulder weight of body armor under their outer layers. 2 carried a collapsible stretcher between them with the controlled urgency of people who have done this in places with much less adequate footing. On the stretcher was a man in his late 30s, unconscious, with the dense muscle mass and sun-damaged skin of someone who has spent years in hard outdoor environments. His clothing had been partially cut away, field dressings on his left side, a tourniquet on his right arm that was more professionally executed than anything Elena had ever seen in a civilian ER. A bite block between his teeth and a military-issue cervical collar. The man at the front, tall, early 40s, dark hair cut close to military regulation, jaw set at the specific angle of focused aggression and barely controlled fear, put both hands flat on the charge desk. "Trauma bay," he said. "Completely level, compressed force. Now." "He's bradying down." Priya managed to page overhead trauma team to Bay 3 in a voice impressively steady given that she was clearly terrified. The men moved past without waiting. Elena followed them. She came through the trauma bay doors 30 seconds behind the group, having stopped to pull gloves from the hallway dispenser. By the time she arrived, they had transferred the casualty from the field stretcher to the trauma bay gurney with a smooth, practiced pivot. The team leader was at the patient's head. Primary is the left flank. Fragment injury. Bleed controlled in the field. Secondary is the bradycardia. Rate's been dropping since we loaded. Third is airway. He's maintaining but marginally. The Calloway came through from the adjacent bay, still gloved from the construction case. He stopped in the doorway, took in the scene, and made the evident decision to treat this as a normal trauma presentation. "Heart rate?" Calloway asked, moving to the monitor. Last reading was 44. BP? 86/50, dropping. Elena moved to the left side of the gurney and began assessing the wound dressings without being invited. The team leader recited the field treatment history and clipped professional bursts. Morphine 4 milligrams IM at site 1 liter, normal saline in the aircraft tourniquet to the right arm 90 minutes ago for arterial bleed from a fragment wound. Loosened at 60 minutes per protocol, current status holding. Left flank packed with hemostatic gauze. Calloway was processing all of this. He was doing it well. Elena gave him that. "Who are you people?" Harrington's voice. E had followed the emergency page from Bay 1. He stood in the bay entrance, in his immaculate white coat, looking at the tactical men with an expression attempting to arrange itself into authoritative neutrality. The team leader turned to look at him. "Sir, I need your trauma attending, a cardiology consult, and blood product access. We have a bradycardic trend not resolving with fluid challenge, and I believe the cardiac irritability may be fragment adjacent." "This is a civilian facility," Harrington said. He was looking at the sidearms 2 of the men were openly wearing. They had made a deliberate decision not to remove them. "You cannot bring armed personnel into this building. You need to identify yourselves before any treatment is initiated." The team leader looked at Harrington with the expression Elena recognized. A competent, busy person who has just encountered an obstacle making no contribution to the situation at hand. "His name is Warrant Officer Daniel Reyes," the team leader said, each word precisely placed. "He is assigned to a classified element. His care is authorized under military exigent circumstances. I am not at liberty to provide further identification in a public corridor. What I can tell you is that if your hospital's administrative posture causes further delay and he dies, the institutional consequences will be severe and lasting." He turned back to the gurney. "Does your physician need anything from me, or can he work?" Calloway, to his considerable credit, had been working the entire time. I can work, Calloway said. You will stop. Harrington walked into the bay, his voice at the register he believed brooked no argument. This patient will not receive treatment in this facility until I have identification and legal clearance. He pointed at Calloway. Step back. Calloway did not step back. His jaw tightened with the physician's particular fury, the fury of someone told by an administrator to stop doing medicine. The patient has a third-degree AV block developing, Calloway said. If this progresses to complete heart block, he needs transcutaneous pacing. I am not stopping. Dr. Calloway. Dr. Harrington. Elena spoke from the left side of the gurney. She did not look up. She was assessing the flank wound, carefully peeling back the field dressing. Something about the wound geometry was bothering her. The entry angle was wrong for shrapnel. With respect, you need to either help or leave. The room went very still. Elena became aware that all 6 tactical men had shifted almost imperceptibly in her direction. Not toward intervention, more like a collective attention snap, the way a group of people who operate by sound do when they hear a voice they recognize. Nurse Vasquez. Harrington's voice was compressed to its most dangerous register. You were told to leave this facility. Your presence here is unauthorized. The badge is in my pocket, Elena said. I haven't left the building. Right now I'm assessing a wound. She looked up at Calloway. The fragment geometry on the left flank is wrong. The entry wound is too lateral for the trajectory angle. I think there's a secondary fragment that migrated medially. If it's near the cardiac silhouette, that's your arrhythmia. Calloway looked at her, then at the portable ultrasound. Show me. She took the probe. She moved it to the left chest wall and scanned with the systematic efficiency of someone who had done thoracic ultrasound in the backs of moving vehicles in the dark. The image assembled on the monitor, a hyperechoic density, small and irregular, seated approximately 2 centimeters from the inferior wall of the left ventricle. Every time the heart contracted, it made contact with that fragment. There, Elena said. The team leader exhaled through his nose, the specific exhale of someone whose worst hypothesis has just been confirmed. Can you get it out? He asked. We need cardiothoracic surgery, Calloway said. This is beyond. He will die if you transfer him in his current hemodynamic state, the team leader said. You know that. Can someone here remove that fragment? Calloway looked at Elena. Elena looked at the fragment on the screen. She had done this before. Not in a hospital, in a tent, in the dark, with a field kit and a headlamp, with a team medic running ketamine while she worked under a combat casualty care protocol that covered exactly this eventuality. She had done it, and the man she had done it on was alive and had a teenage daughter, and she had been to that daughter's graduation because her father had insisted. She had not done it in a hospital. She did not have cardiothoracic surgical privileges. She was, as of approximately 40 minutes ago, in the process of having her nursing license stripped entirely. None of this was the relevant question. The relevant question was the one she had been asking since she was 27 years old, and first placed her hands inside a man's chest in a country her government had declined to officially acknowledge operating in. Can this person survive if I don't do this? I need a thoracotomy kit, Elena said. Ketamine and propofol. And I need Dr. Harrington on the other side of that door. Absolutely not, Harrington said. You are not performing surgery in my hospital. The team leader stepped toward Harrington. He was 6'2", built like infrastructure, with the physical presence of a person who is being trained to manage violence and has made a decision about whether to exercise it. He stopped 6 inches from Harrington and looked down at him. He didn't touch him. He didn't threaten him. He simply stood there, completely calm, completely serious. Harrington took a step back, then another. He was against the wall. Your nurse, the team leader said very quietly, is the best forward surgical specialist I have ever worked with. I know this because I have personally handed her instruments in locations that would not appear on any map you have ever seen. I watched her remove a fragment from a coronary vessel in the back of a moving helicopter at night. using a headlamp and a field scalpel. The man she operated on is currently commanding his own team. He looked at Harrington with the measured attention of a person accustomed to reading quickly what people are made of. You have an administrative role in this building. I respect that. But right now, a man who has spent 15 years serving this country is about to die because a fragment is beating against his heart with every contraction. I am asking you, one more time, to step outside. The room was completely silent. The monitor tracking Reyes's heart rate showed 38, then 36. Harrington looked at Elena. She was already pulling on surgical gloves. He walked out of the bay. What followed was the kind of time that operates differently from ordinary time. The 34 minutes Elena spent working on Warrant Officer Daniel Reyes was simultaneously interminable and instantaneous, each second densely packed with action, while the whole of it seemed to compress into a single sustained moment of absolute focus. This was not unusual. She had spent a significant portion of her professional life inside this compression. Calloway managed the anesthesia, not strictly within his training, but he executed it with a competence that Elena noted and filed for later. The team medic, the quietest of the six, assisted with the automatic attentiveness of someone who has either trained with her before or is very good at reading how a skilled operator works. She went through the intercostal space between the fifth and sixth ribs on the left side. She was precise, not fast by the standards she was accustomed to, but in the relative luxury of a hospital trauma bay with lighting and equipment and a second trained person at the table, she was measured. Deliberate. She did not take risks she did not need to take. The fragment was where the ultrasound had indicated, a sliver of steel roughly 8 millimeters long, seated in the pericardial tissue adjacent to the inferior wall of the left ventricle, not in the myocardium itself, which was the thing that had kept Reyes alive, but close enough that the mechanical irritation of each heartbeat was driving the progressive conduction disorder. She could see it, a glint of metal and the surgical field light, almost invisible against the dark, glistening tissue, tapping against the ventricular wall with each beat. She removed it in 47 seconds. The arrhythmia resolved within 2 minutes of removal, the rhythm rebuilding from its degraded state to a junctional escape rate and then, cleanly, into a normal sinus pattern at 68 beats per minute, as though the heart had simply been waiting for someone to remove the thing that was confusing it. Reyes's blood pressure climbed. Elena closed. She stepped back from the table, stripped her outer gloves, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the immediate aftermath. She was aware of Calloway checking the monitor with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something he wasn't entirely sure was real. She was aware of the team leader, who was standing at the foot of the gurney looking at Reyes's face with an expression she understood and did not intrude upon. She walked to the sink and began scrubbing. Behind her, she heard the team leader say very quietly, "He's good." And then, a moment later, to her commander, she turned off the faucet. She dried her hands. She turned off the faucet. She dried her hands. She turned around. He was looking at her. The tactical men in the room had squared up slightly, not to attention, not a formal posture, but the organic alignment that happens when a group of people who operate together want to make a statement in the only physical register they share. "You haven't been called that in a while," he said. "No," Elena agreed. "You pulled that fragment in 47 seconds without fluoroscopy in a bay you've never operated in," he said. "You guided the echo with your left hand while prepping the field with your right. You haven't lost a step." Elena looked at the monitor where Reyes's vitals were stabilizing, each number moving in the right direction with the clean, purposeful momentum of a body that has been given back the conditions it needs to survive. "He'll need a cardiothoracic consult in the morning," she said, "and close monitoring for pericardial effusion. The fragment was seated near enough to the sac that there may be some reactive fluid accumulation. The flank wound needs formal surgical exploration. The hemostatic gauze has held, but I can't assess the depth of the primary channel without imaging. We'll have a team here in 6 hours," he said. "He'll be transferred to a military facility in the morning." I'll pause. "He's going to be okay." Yes, Elena said. He is. A long moment passed. Elena, he said. His name was Maddox, which was the only name she had ever known him by, and she had known him for 11 years, longer than she had known almost anyone else in her life. She had been in the dark with him, and in the fire with him, and in the particular specific silence that comes after a thing goes wrong and you are still alive and someone isn't. We heard about the situation here with the chief. We didn't come because of that. We came because Reyes needed you, but I want you to know we heard about it. It doesn't matter, she said. It does, he said. It matters to the people who know what you are. She felt something that was not quite sentimentality, but was in the same approximate region. The way you feel when something that has been underground surfaces briefly before going under again. He needs monitoring every 20 minutes, she said. BP, rhythm, and a manual pericardial pressure check every hour. Understood, Maddox said. She walked toward the bay door. She came through the double doors into the corridor and nearly walked into Harrington. He had been standing outside, which she should have anticipated. He was not alone. The hospital administrator, Renata Coelho, had materialized along with the overnight security supervisor. They formed a small, anxious cluster that parted around Elena's emergence from the bay like water around a moving obstacle. Harrington had recovered his composure, though it was sitting differently on his face than it usually did. The fit slightly wrong, like a jacket returned from a cleaner that was hung on the wrong hanger. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, "I want your badge. I want you out of this building. I am calling the state board and the police, and you need to understand that unauthorized surgical intervention, practicing medicine without a license, and battery on a patient will result in criminal." "Dr. Harrington." The voice came from behind Elena. She stepped slightly aside to let Maddox come through the doors. He was carrying a folder, dark blue, government issue, the kind with the sealed tab along the top edge. He handed it to Harrington without ceremony. Harrington looked at the letterhead visible through the translucent cover sheet. "This is a Department of Defense medical authorization document," Maddox said. "It authorizes Warrant Officer Reyes's treatment by Commander Elena Vasquez under emergency provisions of Title 10, covering the use of qualified military medical personnel in civilian emergency settings when no equivalent military facility is available within the required treatment window. Your facility was the treatment destination. Commander Vasquez was the qualifying military medical personnel. The authorization is retroactive to the moment your attending physician identified the need for the intervention." Harrington looked up. She was discharged. She's a civilian nurse. "She holds a permanent reserve commission," Maddox said. "Her military designation did not terminate with her discharge. She is a commander, United States Army Medical Corps. Her license to practice under that commission is federal and supersedes state licensing requirements under the conditions covered by this document." He looked at Harrington steadily. "Sir, I want to be direct. The man in that bay is a decorated warrant officer who has served this country for 15 years in locations that required everything he had. Commander Vasquez spent 6 years keeping people like him alive in those locations. She just saved his life in your hospital using skills she developed under conditions that most people cannot imagine. If you bring any action against her, state board, police, any action at all, I will ensure the full factual record of what happened in that room tonight is made available to every relevant authority. And I will personally ask Warrant Officer Reyes, when he is recovered, to describe Commander Vasquez's contribution to this facility in the most public venue available to him." A pause, which, given his personal history and the nature of his service, would be an extremely visible venue. Renata Coelho was already reading the folder. She looked at Harrington. Her expression was that of a person who has just identified the path of least institutional exposure. "James," she said very quietly, "we should talk." Harrington stood very still. Elena watched him. She watched the specific interior process of a person who has made the calculation and found, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that it does not resolve in his favor. The composure held, but the thing behind it, the infrastructure of certainty that had allowed him to operate the way he operated, was shifting. He looked at her. She returned the look, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply present in the way she had been present in every difficult place she had ever been placed. "The badge," he said finally. His voice had lost its resonance. He sounded, for the first time since she had known him, tired. "Keep it." He walked away down the corridor, Renata Coelho at his elbow speaking rapidly about attorneys and documentation and institutional positioning. Elena watched them go. Maddox came to stand beside her. They stood in the corridor under the fluorescent lights, which hummed their flat note at exactly the same frequency they had hummed at the beginning of the night. "What happens now?" he said. Elena thought about this. She thought about the USB drive in her locker with 4 years of carefully maintained records. She thought about Gerald Polk's rhythm stabilizing. She thought about Dimitri's blood pressure climbing. She thought about the fragment she had just held between her fingers. 8 millimeters of steel that had been beating against a man's heart for however many hours it took to fly from wherever they had been to here. "Now," she said, "I go check on my patients." She walked back down the corridor, footsteps even, an unhurried badge on her chest, hands still carrying the faint chemical sting of iodine and surgical gloves, until the quiet machinery of the night ward swallowed her back into the work that was and had always been the only thing she required of herself. Outside, through the frosted eastern windows, the rain was beginning to ease. The rotor sound had faded entirely into the normal register of the night, and if you had come in off the street right then and stood in that corridor, you would not have known that anything had happened here at all. You would have just seen a nurse, moving through the fluorescent light, doing her job. If Elena's story of quiet courage and unstoppable conviction kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. True heroes don't announce themselves. They simply show up, do what needs to be done, and walk back into the night. Subscribe for more stories of the people who carry the heaviest history in the quietest uniforms. And drop a comment below, would you have had the courage to step forward the way Elena did? See you in the next one.